Welcome to the deep dive. We're tackling something you guys wanted to explore further, the connection between autism services and private equity. It gets pretty interesting the more you learn about it. Our main source today is this article from the Outside the Twilight Zone, Welcome to Autism Monopoly. They use, well, the Monopoly board as like a metaphor to explain what's going on. So shall we roll the dice and see where we land?
I think that's a great way to put it. The article shines a light on something that we've been seeing across healthcare generally. Private equity firms have been buying up healthcare providers, and in this case, they're focusing on the ones that specialize in autism services.
Right, and the article uses this fictional story about Linda and her son Sam to show how this plays out, like in a real family's life. Sam is prescribed 40 hours of applied behavioral analysis therapy, ABA, each week. 40 hours? That just seems like so much, doesn't it?
It is. It is a lot. And the article kind of points out that ABA therapy, while it's often called the gold standard, it might not be the best fit for every single child. What's important to keep in mind is that ABA is the main therapy that's funded by the Autism CARES Act. So it creates this kind of dot funnel effect almost.
Oh, I see what you mean. So it's like even though the CARES Act had good intentions, it kind of pushes kids toward ABA, maybe without even meaning to.
Exactly.
But then the article takes it even further. It suggests that this volume-based approach, more hours, meaning more billable services, that it ends up benefiting private equity firms more than the kids.
Yeah, that's a key point the article brings up. It raises concerns about possible conflicts of interest. When the focus shifts to making a profit, then the needs of each individual child can get overlooked. The article even goes so far as to say that these firms are essentially turning children into commodities, like they're products in a system that's just designed to, well, to squeeze out as much money as possible.
Wow. They don't hold back, do they? I mean, they're painting a pretty serious picture here with this monopoly analogy. So if ABA isn't always the best, why is it everywhere?
Well, the article dives into that. It argues that the way ABA is structured, all those hours of therapy, it just makes it really profitable. Plus, the demand for these services is always high, so it's seen as this recession-proof industry. Yeah. And a reliable income, even when the economy is struggling.
So it makes sense from a business point of view. But it does make you wonder about the real human impact, you know? Speaking of the business side of things, the article brings up insurance companies and, like, all the audits that come with them. Linda, the mom in the story, she gets stuck in this web of paperwork, trying to prove that each hour of Sam's ABA therapy is justified.
That part really highlights how this profit-driven approach can actually cause problems within the system. Think about it. You've got insurance companies which also want to make money, obviously wanting to see a return on what they're paying. And then you've got these private equity firms trying to, like, bump up those billable hours. Families get caught in the middle.
Right, right. So it's not just about the kids or their parents. It's this whole network of people involved, each with their own agenda. But there's another layer to this whole thing, too. The article talks about something called the Special Research Initiative. It's part of that Autism CARES Act we talked about, right?
Yep. It's almost like a hidden part of this whole situation. The article makes the point that while millions of dollars go to research about the causes of autism, hardly anything is going towards addressing the immediate needs of people who are autistic right now.
Huh. So it's like they're focusing on finding the why, but kind of ignoring the how do we help people who are struggling now?
Yeah, exactly.
It makes you wonder what the priorities really are, right? I mean, what good is finding a cure if people are struggling to get support today?
That's a good question. And taking a step back to look at the bigger picture, it makes you wonder if the ultimate goal of autism services is really to help autistic people thrive as they are. Or is it more about, fitting them into some kind of traditional medical model?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Going back to Linda's story, there's this powerful scene where she asks Sam's therapist, what does he need? And the therapist says, it's what the model says he needs. 40 hours is the gold standard.
That really sums it up, doesn't it? Sam's individual needs are kind of lost in this standardized system. And it brings up another important question. Who's the one deciding what the gold standard is? And is it truly helping autistic people, or is it more about forcing them into a box?
It's about control, almost, isn't it? And it's not just the families feeling that pressure. The article says that therapists are stuck in the system, too, like they're playing by someone else's rules.
Absolutely. It raises ethical questions for therapists. Are they really free to advocate for what their clients truly need? Or are they limited by the financial demands of these private equity firms they work for?
It's like everyone's playing a role in this system. The families, the therapists, the insurance companies, the private equity firms. But who's winning, really, and at
Mm.
what cost?
That's the core question. And what's especially striking is how the article talks about this monopoly board as having no end. It's like this endless loop of therapy hours and bills piling up. There's no real way out.
So it never really ends. And the article points out that as Sam gets closer to being an adult, the services available to him start to disappear. It's like the game ends for him, but then it just starts over with another kid. They even say that in this version of Monopoly, the children are just pawns being moved around by the private equity firms.
That's a powerful image, isn't it? It makes us question if this whole way of approaching autism services is actually helping autistic people. Or is it just feeding a system that puts profit before well-being?
Yeah. The language the article uses is really striking. It calls the system one where the rules are written in profits and the human cost is hidden between the lines. It's hard not to feel uneasy after reading that.
Definitely. It makes you think about how much control autistic individuals actually have in this system. Who gets to make decisions about their care? Is it the private equity firms, the insurance companies, the therapists, the families? And how can we make sure autistic people have a voice in shaping their own future?
That's a big question, isn't it? What if, instead of these standard therapies, we focused on a more personalized approach? Something that recognizes the individual strengths of each person. What if we truly embraced neurodiversity instead of trying to make everyone fit the same mold?
That's the kind of shift in thinking we need to see. Instead of seeing autistic people as like pieces to be moved around, we need to empower them to make choices about their own lives.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing their humanity, their agency, their potential.
Exactly. It's about moving away from this idea of fixing something and towards understanding and acceptance. It's about recognizing that autistic people aren't problems to be solved, but individuals with unique perspectives and contributions to make.
So we've kind of unpacked this whole monopoly metaphor. We've started to dig into the complexities of private equity's role in autism services. But there's a lot more to uncover.
For sure. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll actually hear from autistic individuals themselves. We'll explore their experiences, their thoughts on these systems we've talked about, and their hopes for the future.
Stay with us as we keep unraveling this complex issue and search for ways to build a fairer and more just future for autistic individuals.
So welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about this idea of an autism monopoly, looking at how private equity is involved and that focus on ABA therapy. But now I think it's time to hear from the people who are most affected by all this, autistic individuals themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been talking a lot about systems and structures, but what about the real-life experiences of autistic people? How do they feel about the services they're getting, the systems they have to deal with, and how society sees them, how people interact with them? That's what I really want to understand better.
To get a better grasp on that, we're going to turn to some autistic writers, advocates, and researchers, people who have been kind enough to share their thoughts and experiences on these really complicated issues.
We keep coming back to this gold standard idea when it comes to autism services. And ABA therapy is often held up as the way to go. But I'm curious, do autistic people themselves feel like that label really fits? I mean, does it actually reflect the wide range of needs and preferences within the autistic community?
That's such a good question. And it gets to the heart of what many autistic writers and advocates have been saying. This one-size-fits-all approach to autism services just doesn't work. What's considered best practice or evidence-based might not actually be helpful for every single autistic person. It might even be harmful in some cases.
So it's not just about whether a therapy works in general, but whether it works for a specific person,
Right.
taking into account their strengths, their challenges, and what they want to achieve.
Precisely. And some autistic people have raised concerns about the possible downsides of some therapies, especially the ones that focus on changing or suppressing autistic behaviors, instead of helping autistic people to, thrive and be themselves.
It's almost like saying, let's make you fit in with our idea of what's normal, instead of saying, let's help you be the best version of yourself, however that looks.
Yeah, you're getting it. The whole idea behind the neurodiversity movement is that autism isn't a disorder that needs to be fixed. It's a natural variation of the human brain.
So it's about shifting away from that medical model, where autism is seen as a problem to be solved, and moving towards a social model that recognizes the challenges autistic people face, in a world that's often not designed to accommodate their needs and differences.
Exactly. And a lot of autistic people are calling for more focus on supporting them to develop their strengths, helping them build independence and live fulfilling lives that feel true to who they are.
It sounds like the goal should be changing the environment to be more inclusive and accessible, rather than trying to change autistic people themselves.
Right. It's about creating spaces where autistic people feel safe and respected, where they can express themselves freely without feeling like they have to mask or hide who they are. And it's about valuing the unique things they bring to the table.
This makes me think about the importance of representation. We've been talking about autism from a sort of outside perspective, but it's crucial to center the voices of autistic people themselves. How do we make sure those perspectives are heard and that autistic people have a real say in shaping policies, practices, and research related to autism?
That is so important. Having authentic representation of autistic people is key in every part of this conversation. It means making sure they're not just being talked about, but that they're actively involved in making decisions that directly affect their lives.
So it's not just about having a seat at the table, it's about making sure their voices are truly listened to and that their opinions are taken seriously.
Exactly. And it's really important to remember that the autistic community is incredibly diverse. There's no single autistic experience.
Right. And that reminds me of that phrase, nothing about us without us. It's such a powerful statement in disability rights advocacy. Decisions that affect the lives of disabled people shouldn't be made without their full participation.
Absolutely. And that principle applies just as much to autism. Autistic people deserve the right to self-determination, to have a say in matters that directly affect them, and to be treated with respect and dignity. It's about recognizing their agency and their right to shape their own lives.
So how do we actually move towards a more inclusive and equitable approach to autism services? What are some real concrete steps we can take, whether as individuals, communities, or as a whole society? It feels like we've been talking about the problems, but now it's like, what can we actually do? It's a huge question, and there's no easy answer. But I think a lot of it starts with a fundamental shift in perspective. We need to stop seeing autism as something that needs to be fixed, and instead embrace it as a form of neurodiversity that makes our world a richer place.
So it's about challenging our own assumptions, questioning our biases, and being open to different ways of understanding and relating to difference.
Exactly. And it's about truly listening to and learning from autistic people. They're the experts on their own experiences, and their insights are so valuable in creating a more inclusive and supportive future.
So we need to create spaces where their voices can be heard, amplified, and taken seriously. Not just token representation, but real, meaningful inclusion.
Absolutely. We need to support autistic-led organizations, encourage more autistic representation in media and popular culture, and advocate for policies that genuinely prioritize the rights and well-being of autistic individuals. Because policies have a huge impact on people's everyday lives. And even something as basic as the language we use matters. Avoiding terms that are offensive or stigmatizing, choosing language that's respectful and empowering, it can all make a difference.
Right. It's about using person-first language, like saying autistic person rather than person with autism, and recognizing that autism is part of a person's identity, not something separate from who they are. It's about respect and acknowledging their wholeness as individuals.
That shift in language reflects a deeper shift in understanding, doesn't it? It's about moving away from a deficit-based view of autism and towards one that recognizes the strengths, talents, and contributions of autistic people.
Exactly. And it's about building a society where autistic people feel valued, accepted, and supported to live their lives to the fullest, where their differences are seen as assets, not liabilities.
Which brings us to the question of access. How do we make sure that autistic individuals have access to the resources and support they need to thrive, regardless of their background, their socioeconomic status, or where they live? Because those factors can create huge barriers.
That's a complex issue with a lot of different aspects. But I think a big part of it is addressing systemic barriers and inequalities. We need to advocate for policies that promote things like affordable housing, accessible health care, inclusive education, and real employment opportunities for autistic individuals. These are basic needs that everyone should have access to.
And those services and supports need to be culturally sensitive and responsive to the incredible diversity within the autistic community. A one-size-fits-all approach just isn't going to work.
Exactly. It's about getting away from that one-size-fits-all model and moving towards a more individualized and person-centered approach to care, recognizing that each person is unique and has their own set of strengths and challenges.
And people's needs change over time, too. We need to provide support throughout a person's life, from early childhood all the way through adulthood, to make sure autistic people have what they need to live full and meaningful lives. It's not just a one-time thing.
You're absolutely right. It's about creating a society where autistic people are not just surviving, but truly thriving, where their voices are heard, their rights are respected, and their contributions are celebrated, where they can be their authentic selves without fear of judgment or discrimination.
It's a vision of a world where neurodiversity is embraced as a strength, where differences are valued, and everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential. That's a world I want to live in.
It's a beautiful vision,
Yeah.
and I truly believe it's possible if we're willing to do the work. It's going to take a collective effort, a willingness to listen, to learn, and to challenge the way things are. But a more inclusive and equitable future for autistic people is possible. I really believe that.
And that leads to a really crucial question. How do we turn these aspirations into action? How do we go beyond just talking about change and actually make it happen?
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. We started by looking at that autism monopoly idea, and then we heard from autistic individuals themselves.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. We've learned a lot about the different systems involved. But I think the big question now is, where do we go from here? How do we move past just raising awareness and having good intentions? How do we actually create change, real change? A future where autistic people are not just included, but where they're truly valued for who they are.
You're right. That's the core of it. And I don't think there's one easy answer. There's no magic solution that'll fix everything overnight.
Right.
But I do believe there are things we can all do, both individually and as a society, to make a difference.
What are some of those things?
Well, I think it starts with each of us taking responsibility for our own learning and growth. There are so many resources out there, books, articles, podcasts, and they're created by autistic authors, advocates, and organizations.
So really taking the time to learn from autistic people themselves.
Exactly. Seeking out those voices, listening to their stories, and learning from their lived experiences is so important.
It's about recognizing that we don't have all the answers and being willing to be guided by people who actually understand what it's like to be autistic. And as we learn, we need to pay attention to the language we use. Words have power, and the way we talk about autism shapes how other people see it.
Absolutely. Using respectful and empowering language is crucial. It shows that we recognize the diversity and the humanity of the autistic community. We're seeing each person as an individual, not just a diagnosis.
So true. But it's not just about words, is it? Our actions matter too.
Of course.
Supporting autistic-led businesses, pushing for inclusive policies in our schools and workplaces, speaking up when we see injustice happening, all these things, these everyday actions can have a ripple effect.
You're absolutely right. It's about putting our values into practice. Inclusion isn't just a nice idea. It's something we have to actively work towards.
But I think it's also important to acknowledge that what we do as individuals can only go so far.
Yeah, I agree.
We need systemic change if we want to create a truly equitable society. And that's where advocacy comes in. Working to change policies that affect access to things like healthcare, education, and job opportunities. It's about creating a system that helps autistic individuals reach their full potential, not one that holds them back.
That's so important.
And let's not forget about the power of stories.
Oh, absolutely. Stories are so powerful.
Sharing the stories of autistic people in their own words can really change hearts and minds.
Right. It helps to break down stereotypes and build empathy.
It's about humanizing the experience, moving beyond labels and diagnoses to see the person, to see their dreams, their struggles, their victories.
Exactly. When we connect on a human level, it's so much harder to ignore injustice. It sparks compassion and motivates us to create a world where everyone feels seen and valued.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question. What role can you play in creating a world where autistic people are not just included, but truly valued and empowered? It's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
It really is. Maybe it means educating yourself and the people around you. Maybe it means speaking up for change in your community or at your job. Or maybe it's just listening. Really listening to the experiences of autistic people.
Whatever it looks like for you, remember that your actions, even the small ones, can contribute to building a more just and equitable future.
That's what's so amazing about knowledge. It gives us the power to act, to make a difference.
So as we go forward, let's choose to be curious, compassionate, and courageous. Let's keep learning, keep listening, and keep working towards a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. That's what this deep dive has been all about. Thanks for joining us.